Welcome into the warmth of worship here in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. It was that graybeard grandfather of U.S. poetry, Walt Whitman, who opined that this nation's powerfulest scene and show was Election Day. The still, small voice vibrating, America's choosing day. The final ballot shower from east to west, the paradox and conflict. Now, in the aftermath of our most recent choosing day, we return to a larger, even different perspective. In a religion that names as one of our core principles the use of the democratic process, we dare not suggest that voting and politics are inconsequential. Not that at all. But today, in a congregation defined by our shared commitment to societal transformation, we ask about other potential pathways to the cultural change we so desperately seek and need. What of those who continue to feel shut out, silenced, suppressed, where politics is concerned? What of those who honestly feel unwelcomed and unheard, who consider the available partisan choices and concede that their core concerns remain completely unaddressed? What of those whose patience has limits and who are now asking about how to rebel in ways that the status quo will most assuredly regard as improper? If this morning our minds are stayed on the hope for real transformation, stayed on the hope for deep and lasting transformation, stayed on freedom, we may discover that every day is choosing day. And that many ways other than voting and politics offer more hopeful pathways to real change. Let's sing it. That hope for lasting liberation, and as we prepare to do so, let us greet one another with words of hope.
Good morning. This piece is by Langston Hughes. I look at the world. I look then at the silly halls through dark eyes and dark skin. And this is what I know, that all these walls oppression builds have got to go. This reading's by Jennifer Rose Garcia in protest to policymaking. On January 3rd, 1945, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was sworn into the U.S. House of Representatives, ushering in a new era of black politics in Congress. Unlike his African-American predecessors, Powell came to Congress unwilling to play by their rules, ready to aggravate the status quo in pursuit of civil rights. As Powell himself recalled of his first meeting with Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn, upon his election. The Honorable Sam Rayburn of Texas said, "Adam, everybody down here expects you to come with a bomb in both hands. Now don't do that, Adam. Oh, I know all about you, and I know that you can't be quiet very long. But don't throw those bombs. Just see how things operate here. Take your time. Freshman members of Congress are supposed not to be heard and not even be seen too much. There are a lot of good men around here. Listen to what they have to say. Drink it all in. Get reelected a few times, and then start moving. But for God's sakes, Adam, don't throw those bombs." Adam Powell responded, "Mr. Speaker, I've got a bomb in each hand, and I'm going to throw them right away."
Frank X. Walker is a poet and educator, a native of Kentucky who now teaches at the University of Kentucky and has served as poet laureate for the Bluegrass State. Setting aside his impressive academic credentials, in his poem, Lil' Kings, Walker adopts a vernacular of the streets, a rap rhythm to raise a challenging question, a warning. Walker makes use of a disturbing word, one that is essential to the poem, but deplorable nonetheless. Honoring his intent, we offer it today just as he wrote it. What if the good Reverend Dr. MLKJR was just Marty, a little king, not a pastor, but a little faster from the streets, quoting gangster rap, not Gandhi? Was not Dr. King, but King Doctor, or Ice K, his peace sign on a gold tooth, or gleaming 14-karat like from around his neck? What if somebody screamed, "Nigger," hit him in the head with a brick, and he pulled out a 9 and squeezed off 1 or 2 rounds, not tears, praying only that he not miss, sported MLK on fat brass knuckles and a left-handed diamond pinky ring, walked the streets with his homeboys, spray painting, "Let Freedom Ring," and "I Had a Dream" on bus stops and stop signs. Got arrested for conspiring to incite riots, disturbing the peace and resisting arrest. Didn't preach from no pulpit, but on a microphone behind turntables, mixing and scratching, listening to Dr. Dre, Wu-Tang, and the Notorious B.I.G. Pants down to his high tops, hat on backwards, eye on a prized new voice, not no bell, no piece of nothing that just rings when it's hit, a voice that hits back. Could he still be king? On March 14th, 1968, Jack F. Rowe was the police chief of Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan. In a little over a year before he'd reach his 40th birthday, a kidney ailment would claim his life. But on that night, he'd play a minor role in our nation's unfolding history, one that would be laughable were it not so sad. A car stopped on the way to Grosse Pointe South High School. Chief Rowe got in the back seat. In keeping with the plan, he immediately climbed onto the lap of another man. Off they went, the chief and the passenger. Two grown men, the one sitting atop the other's lap. Almost 2 centuries earlier, on December 16th, 1773, angry colonists boarded ships docked at Griffin's Wharf in Boston. In a carefully planned act of subversion, they ripped open hundreds of chests and proceeded to dump about 92,000 pounds of tea into the harbor's chilly waters. It was an act of aggressive resistance, a spark that would eventually erupt into the raging conflagration of the American Revolution. Belying some simplistic assessment at odds with the dubious claims of the contemporary Tea Party faction, this act did not unite those patriarchal founders. George Washington found it abhorrent, a display of vandalism demonstrating regrettable disregard for property rights. Benjamin Franklin called the subversive raid an act of violent injustice, contending that the East India Tea Company should be compensated for its losses. To these privileged patriarchs, those marauding malcontents had rebelled in a way that was not proper. Gordon Moreland was there on that March 1968 night in Grosse Pointe Farms. He too had a minor role in history. Standing at the curb alongside the high school, a dark-colored sedan pulled up alongside him. He instinctively reached for the car door and opened it. To his surprise, he saw Jack Rowe, the Grosse Pointe Farms police chief, sitting on the lap of another man. The chief slid off. He and the other man emerged, the latter barely able to walk. Stretching, the man looked at Moreland and said, "I appreciate you opening the door for me." John Brown was an armed combatant, violently resisting slavery in Kansas. But it is his organization of the October 1859 raid on the Harper's Ferry Armory that secured his place in history. There, Brown tried to launch a violent uprising intended ultimately to undermine the institution of slavery. Captured and tried, Brown's life ended on a Virginia gallows. It was his peculiar doctrine, Henry David Thoreau would say of Brown, that a man has a perfect right to interfere by force with the slaveholder in order to rescue the slave. And Thoreau would add, I agree with him. Many, however, did not. Abraham Lincoln, in remarks directed at Southern enslavers, said of Brown's raid, it was so absurd that the slaves, with all their ignorance, saw plainly enough that it could not succeed. He equated it to the many attempts related in history at the assassination of kings and emperors. His mocking tone is evident when he summarizes, an enthusiast broods over the oppression of a people till he fancies himself commissioned by heaven to liberate them. He ventures the attempt, which ends in little else than his own execution. Though commending Brown for his abolitionist intentions, Lincoln deplored Brown's violence, bloodshed, and treason. By Abraham Lincoln's judgment, John Brown had rebelled in a way that was not proper. Jack Rowe and Gordon Moreland were the supporting cast. The main actor that March 1968 night in Grosse Pointe Farms was a still young black Baptist minister named Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King was by then a resistor with an intersectional focus long before we knew to call it that. His spiritual, moral outrage over racial injustice had broadened into a spiritual, moral outrage over poverty, exploitation, capitalistic excess, and an indefensible war in Southeast Asia. He was increasingly combative and wildly controversial. He was on that night just 3 weeks away from his fateful assassination on a motel balcony in Memphis. King had been invited to speak in Grosse Pointe Farms, a very conservative community, by the local Human Relations Council, a group that included Unitarian minister Harry Meserve. But the community was deeply divided. Some had attempted to coerce the school board into denying the use of the high school for the speech. The streets were chaotic that evening, filled with many furious at King and outraged that he was in their town. Police Chief Jack Rowe was determined that nothing would happen to King while he was visiting Grosse Pointe Farms. So, stopping the car in which King was riding, Rowe got in the back seat and sat on King's lap to shield his body for extra protection. Once the car stopped, Gordon Moreland opened the door only to discover the odd scene, the chief sitting on a man's lap. And to his shock, the man was King, who graciously thanked Moreland before being hastily escorted into a back entrance of the school's auditorium. On March 3rd, 1913, suffragists Alice Paul and Lucy Burns organized a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington on the eve of President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. For decades, women had called for the right to vote, but Paul and Burns were to take the movement in a new, much more confrontative direction. Just as they had hoped, the parade drew attention to their cause, including from some who attacked the women along the parade route. More traditional suffragettes had continued to call for more traditional methods, petitioning state legislatures and lobbying politicians. Carrie Chapman Catt, long veteran of that more civil approach, was adamantly opposed to Paul's actions. We do not, she had declared earlier, have to win sympathy by parading ourselves like the street cleaning department. By 1917, Paul and Burns had organized their National Women's Party. It was this group in January of that year who would be the first ever to engage in picketing at the White House. Woodrow Wilson had spoken of, quote, Woodrow Wilson had spoken of, quote, the chilled, scandalized feeling that overcomes me when I see and hear women speak in public. He had asserted, definitely and irreconcilably opposed to women's suffrage. While the women picketed the White House, hecklers denounced the women as, guess what? Traitors. Traitors. They can't even come up with new names. Traitors. Police arrested the suffragists, and when they refused to pay the fine, sent them to a nearby workhouse where they protested their sentences with a hunger strike. Doris Stevens, another of the undersung heroines of the movement, disclosed in an interview a successful young Harvard engineer said to me the other day, "I don't believe you realize how much men objected to your picketing the White House." I've talked with men in all walks of life, and I tell you, they didn't approve of what you women did. Stevens replied, "Well, of course men didn't like it. Do you think we imagined they would? We knew they would disapprove. When did men ever applaud women fighting for their own liberty? We are approved only when we fight for yours." These women, these unruly women, it seems, had rebelled in a way that was not proper. On that March 14, 1968 evening, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke before a crowd of about 2,700 shoehorned into the Grosse Pointe South High School auditorium. His speech, entitled "The Other America," was a wide-ranging explication of racial injustice, poverty, substandard housing, segregated, inadequate schools, unemployment, and underemployment. In that speech, he reiterated his spiritual commitment to nonviolence, decrying the social unrest that had spilled over into cities literally inflamed by the rage of protesters. But then King added an important commentary. "It is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without at the same time condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention." And I must say tonight, King added memorably, that a riot is the language of the unheard. A riot is the language of the unheard. What are we? In our collective commitment to societal transformation, what are we to make of the intentional acts of social upheaval in our times? What of those, for example, kneeling, marching, blocking traffic, aggressively confronting the police, tearing down statues, both literal and figurative, as acts of protest and resistance. Vote, 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 vote. The insistent barrage was relentless, and as these things go, relatively successful. I vote. I've used and I will continue to use my voice to speak out against voter suppression and against partisan gerrymandering. But my friends, we delude ourselves if we imagine that the societal transformation to which we are committed and which we so desperately need will occur simply by electing the right people. I challenge you to think of a single significant social change that initiated with politicians. Public education, public health, abolition, protection for workers, women's suffrage, the freedom movement, LGBTQ rights, environmental protections. In all of these cases, those elected to office did not lead, they followed. Social change does not ever begin by electing the right people. Social change begins when people work for, struggle for, demand justice. Social change has come from calm and careful civil deliberation and compromise. Social change has followed a defined process resulting in legislation in support of people's demands. And social change has also always included unrest and upheaval. That great early civil rights leader, T. Thomas Fortune, recognized agitators are inevitable, necessary. That great militant abolitionist, Henry Highland Garnet, recognized no oppressed people have ever secured their liberty without resistance. If we here indulge a dishonest telling of history or in delusional hopes for the future, aggrandizing the political process as the initiator of change, may we be brought back to the truth by reminders that it isn't ever so. No one said it more clearly than Audre Lorde. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. To sit in judgment on those who agitate and resist without judging the reasons such actions are needed is to align with the status quo. Change requires discomfort, disruption, dismantling, upheaval. We can't protect what is. We can't judge by what makes us most comfortable if we hope to foster change. Even here. Aspiring to embody the Unitarian Universalism or to be the congregation of 5 years ago, a decade ago, a half century or a century ago is at odds with the vision to which we have committed ourselves. Imagining that we can remain comfortable within or beyond these walls is at odds with the mission to which we have committed ourselves. The opening phrase in our new mission is challenged by our liberating faith. Some of us admitted that we were uncomfortable with that. These acknowledged that the word challenged didn't sound very comfortable to us. Toward the end of his speech that night, King repeated words he'd offered before. Somehow we must come to see that in this pluralistic, interrelated society, we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Tied together, all of us, all of it. So yes, voting and politicians are parts of that network, but only a part, one to which we cannot look to initiate transformation. When it is not election day, when we aren't urging vote, 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 we can still be those insisting that the needs and the demands of the most marginalized, the most oppressed, be heard and heeded. Demands voiced in civil and in uncivil ways. Demands embodied in careful collaboration and in angry agitation. Demands following set processes and procedures, and demands demanded by those who know clearly that only in disruptive ways will they be heard. Challenged by our liberating faith, may we be among the ones listening to and learning from those who have not and who will not find the proper way to rebel. May we be slow to judge, to dismiss, to decry, or to denounce. May we be open to understanding that sometimes a riot may be the only available language for the otherwise unheard.
Welcome to today's service. Whether you're in this room or downstairs in our alternate space in the Bernstein room, watching this service via live stream, or viewing it on archive video, we are honored to have guests with us here today. Our members would like to greet you following the service. So that we may do so, if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Okay. Members, please take note of our guests seated near you. After the service, invite them for conversation and coffee in Freedom Hall. Should it enhance your experience for future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance of the sanctuary. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place your completed card in an offering basket when they are passed later in the service. Members with a life event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. You'll find them along with offering envelopes on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing them down now. Some returning visitors may be interested in hearing about how to join. If so, talk to our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order of service. And to each of you, a warm welcome. My reading is by Harriet Mullen. We are not responsible. From Sleeping with the Dictionary. We're not responsible for your lost or stolen relatives. We cannot guarantee your safety if you disobey our instructions. We do not endorse the causes or claims of people begging for handouts. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Your ticket does not guarantee that we will honor your reservations. In order to facilitate our procedures, please limit your carry-on. Before taking off, please extinguish all smoldering resentments. If you cannot understand English, you will be moved out of the way. In the event of loss, you better look out for yourself. Your insurance was canceled because we can no longer honor your frightful claims. Our handlers lost your luggage, and we are unable to find the key to your legal case. You were detained for interrogation because you fit the profile. You are not presumed to be innocent if the police have reason to suspect you are carrying a concealed wallet. It's not our fault you were born wearing a gang color. It is not our obligation to inform you of your rights. Step aside, please, while our officer inspects your bad attitude. You have no rights that we are bound to respect. Please remain calm, or we can't be held responsible for what happens to you. Oftentimes, my perception does not follow conventional reality, only my own individual reality. These are my visions, and I wish to share them with you, and will be happy to share yours later. We are not responsible for your loss or stolen relatives. My vision is of the millions of Jews that were lost in the Holocaust, millions of Africans lost in the Middle Passage, the many deaths of Native Americans during the Trail of Tears, the resettlement and genocide of the Native Americans. Thousands lost in Iraq, Somalia, Syria, Rwanda, and countless other wars and acts of oppression. We cannot guarantee your safety if you disobey our instructions. 600 men and their partners were misled and duped during the Tuskegee experiment. And I can always hear Eric Garner's cry while he was gasping for breath, "I can't breathe," before his death. We do not endorse the causes or claims of people begging for handouts. We are today painting a picture of invaders, people who are actually unarmed asylum seekers, men, women, and children approaching our southern border. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. These were the signs of Jim Crow and apartheid, along with whites only, colored entrance, And this is the same mindset used to restrict voting rights. Your ticket does not guarantee we will honor your reservations. This was told to Native Americans many times over, and now to our DACA Americans. Before taking off, please extinguish all smoldering resentment. The request made of Adam Clayton Powell and the recommended method of creating a colorblind society. If you cannot understand English, you will be moved out of the way. Visualize the 5-year-old taken from her parent and placed in retention for crossing a border that she did not know existed. In the event of loss, you better look out for yourself. Your insurance was canceled because we can no longer handle your frightful claims. These were our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico after a major hurricane. Our handlers lost your luggage and we are unable to find the key to your legal case. This sounds like the rhetoric given to the progressive voters in Florida, Georgia, Arizona, and other parts of the country. You were detained for interrogation because you fit the profile. And everyone remembers Trayvon Martin. You are not presumed to be innocent if the police have reason to suspect you are carrying a concealed wallet, or in the case of Keith Lamont Scott, smoking a doobie. It is not our fault you were born wearing a gang color. The curse of Cain. It's awful to be born a criminal, and they complain about Judge Kavanaugh being presumed guilty. And you remember how upset he got? It is not our obligation to inform you of your rights. I think of little 12-year-old Tamir Rice playing with a toy gun. Step aside, please, while our officer inspects your bad attitude. I see the Reverend William Barber on his Moral Monday marches. You have no rights we are bound to respect. This was a Dred Scott decision in 1857 by our Supreme Court. And again, September 2018, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testified about being assaulted by Judge Kavanaugh. Please remain calm, or we can't be held responsible for what happens to you. This reminds me of the assaults on the anti-racist demonstrators in Charlottesville, Virginia. While marching against hate, Heather Hare was murdered and 19 others injured. Let us all pledge to forge a bond against hate in any form. Thank you.
There's information in your order about the artist who has once again graciously agreed to allow us to show his art, Howard Barry, a contemporary artist from St. Louis. I encourage this with reservation as long as they're silent. I invite some of you to take a photograph in the remainder of the service with one of Howard Barry's images up on the screen. There's contact information from him. He's deeply appreciative that we return to his art and show it with enthusiasm. He's very moved when he's seen images of this room with his art before us. So if you have a camera and can take a shot in the remainder of the service, as long as it's silent, please do so, and you can send it to him. He'll appreciate it. Just so you know, we never have guest musicians or guest artists who we don't compensate. We believe that artists should be compensated for what they offer, and we thank Mr. Barry for what he does. Today's topic sets up the showing of a very important film here tomorrow evening at 6:30. Information's in your order about American Revolutionary, the evolution of Grace Lee Boggs. Sign up is now open for our upcoming spiritual practice series. You can register to be a part at the adult programming table in Freeman Hall or through our electronic newsletter, Currents, where you'll find many other ways to be involved in the life of this congregation. You're encouraged to sign up as well for the upcoming season of Room in the Inn, in which we will host our homeless neighbors here in our building on Sunday evenings. This requires many of us. Please consider being involved. Part of the challenge of our liberating faith, according to our mission, is to nurture loving community. We here continue to offer support and sympathy to one another, sharing in joy and sorrow alike. Today we again mourn the death of our beloved members, Carolyn Lord and Hannah Miller. We celebrate with our member Laura Magnuson, her husband Dan, and twins Gabby and Tessa upon the birth of baby Nolan, and extend congratulations also to grandparents and our members Ann and Evan Magnuson. We celebrate with Sharon Walker and Dave Walsh as they welcome a new grandson. Our loving concerns and our celebrations always extend beyond these walls. Today our hearts are heavy with the sad news of yet another mass shooting. Our hearts are heavy with the loss of life and property and the damage done to the interdependent web of all existence in the still raging fires in California. Our hearts are heavy with threats to so many of the most marginalized in our own community, our nation, and around the globe. Today, we celebrate those of you who have given of yourselves in service to our nation, many within our congregation. We honor your personal commitment and the commitment of your family and your loved ones who supported you as you served. Please join me in a time of meditation and aspiration. Dear goodness, lift our gaze from unrelenting attention to all of the ways we humans find to embody malice, so that we might continue to notice and celebrate all of the ways we humans continue to be so remarkable. Dear truth, free us from the scourge of prevarications great and small, so that no matter the choices of others, we might live lives of honesty and integrity. Dear beauty, we worship at your altar and are grateful for each glimpse, each sound, each experience that reminds us that our world is yet fecund with exquisite delights. Dear joy, amidst tumults, jangling discord, infuse your delight into our days, that rage and grief may be tempered with laughter and enjoyment. Dear love, make ever more secure your compassionate embrace of our dearest ones, and ever more expansive your compassionate embrace of all, the whole wide world around. Blessed be.
Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us, a community of memory and of hope. For we are now keepers of the dream. Randock Lovely. Please join me in our affirmation of faith. It's number 579 in the back of the gray hymnal. Please rise in body and or spirit. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground.
They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters.
This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle.
Power conceives nothing without another man. It never did, and it never will.
Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them.
The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those who endure.
The Limits of Tyrants by Frederick Douglass. Thank you.
Just this past week in a meeting with some of you, one of you made the comment, I think people in the congregation are tired. I think they're tired of this focus, tired of the demands, tired of not being the good people anymore, tired of what it's calling on from us. I thought of the words of that great spiritual that John played for today's offering music. I thought of a night when I heard Andrew Young speak to a small group of us recounting his deep and undying investment in the struggle for human rights the world around. And at the end of that incredibly powerful speech, Andy Young, with tears in his eyes and in ours, looked out over that assembled group and he said, "I don't feel no ways tired. I don't feel no ways tired. We've come too far from where we started from, and nobody told me that the road was going to be easy. But I don't believe he's brought us this far to leave us." Please be seated.